It's hard to believe we just started 2026. So much has already happened this year, and it's only a month old. As always, we'll start the year by taking a final look back at 2025, and then sharing a few thoughts on what might lie ahead in 2026. Predictions can feel risky in uncertain times. But one thing remains true: business keeps moving. Understanding past performance is one of the best ways to plan for what's next. This month, I've got 3 great interviews lined up. First, BMO Chief Economist Douglas Porter joins us for his quarterly visit to share his top 3 economic stories from 2025 and his outlook for Canada's economy in 2026. Our data expert Sean McCormick breaks down the results of the 2025 holiday shopping season. And for the first time, though hopefully not the last, we welcome Benjamin Jacob, SVP of Services at Mastercard Canada, to talk about shifting consumer habits and how small businesses can use AI to stay competitive in today's uncertain environment. It's not all bad news, but it is all important. Why? Because it's just good business. We're only a few weeks in on the new year, but there's already so much to talk about with the Canadian economy. Interest rates continue to go down while inflation seems stable, but who am I to say? Joining us for his quarterly visit to give us his expert opinion is Chief Economist at Bank of Montreal, Douglas Porter. Douglas, first of all, Happy New Year and welcome back to Just Good Business.
Thank you very much, Al, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Now, let's take a final look back at 2025 before we go ahead. What do you think the top 3 stories were? I mean, I can imagine what they might have been, but what would, in your opinion, were the top 3 stories as it pertained to the Canadian economy?
So I wouldn't want to be facetious, but my initial answer would be tariffs, tariffs, and tariffs.
Right.
But in reality, of course, there was a lot more going on than that. And I think one of the big stories is actually how well the Canadian economy managed to navigate the trade war, which just seemed overwhelming early in the year.
Right.
So I would rank that as the number one story is of course the trade war that erupted. And actually, at the end of the day, Canada was let off on a number of areas. It really was much more focused than initially advertised. It's basically on auto, steel, aluminum, lumber. Those are the sectors that are really heavily affected and harmed. But the rest of the economy really was let off of the U.S. tariffs. But the trade war really was the dominant story. And I think how the Canadian economy managed through it. Second, I would rank, of course, we had a new government, the Carney government. We had the election and the first budget, which didn't come until November. But I think that was the next big story and how the Carney government tried to reorient the Canadian economy a bit away from the U.S., trying to strengthen business investment to, time will tell to what extent they're successful on that front. You cannot turn an ocean liner around on a dime. It will take time. But I thought it was a good effort. And the third story is everything related to AI, I think. And, I think that's the big story as to how the global economy and the U.S. economy in particular just managed its way through all this trade uncertainty as we had this massive wave of spending on AI. And the way it filtered into Canada is we had one of our, best stock market returns that we've seen this century, the second best of the last 25 years. And some of that was the AI. And of course, the surging gold prices was the other story behind that rollicking ride for the TSX, but I think that was the other story.
Yeah, I don't disagree on any of those 3 stories for sure. I mean, AI is going to have a huge impact, not only on employment, but our power needs, the power grid and stuff. It's going to be really interesting to see how things pan out in 2026. Now, the overall inflation ended the year, I think, at 2.2%. Is that correct?
It did. We just recently received the update for the month of December, and it came in at 2.4%. The little bounce at the end of the year comes with a bit of an asterisk because remember, we did get a GST holiday on restaurant meals and liquor a year ago. So that actually reduced the CPI a year ago. But of course, we also had the carbon tax removed this past year, which in a stroke reduced Canada's inflation rate by about 0.5 point.
Right.
Separating out those 2 special factors, Canada's inflation is probably I would say it's in the high 2% range, which is about what we expect for the year ahead.
Yeah. And you mentioned Carney's budget that came out but in November. So maybe not enough time yet to see the effects of that, like the diversification of our economy. What, if anything, does it say about those efforts?
So I don't think we can really read that much from the inflation report in terms of his efforts to diversify the economy. I think where that will show up ultimately, and if he's successful, is we will see it help support employment and overall growth. I don't anticipate the efforts to diversify having that much implication for inflation. Where we've seen some pressure, the groceries have come back a lot. And some of that is the grocers are actually trying to diversify away from the U.S., whether it's Canadian sourcing or even elsewhere. And yeah, that is having a bit of an impact on pushing up grocery prices. Lots of other things going on. Meat prices are rising for completely other different reasons. That's a U.S. story as well. But unfortunately, I think grocery prices are going to be a thorn in our side throughout 2026.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Now, for small business owners, what would you say matters most to them? Is it like the direction of interest rates or the speed of change? We've seen interest rates come down, drop from 3% to 2.25, I believe was the number at the end of this year. Is that enough, or is it not fast enough? What would you say is most important for small business owners?
Well, I think, and I hate to waffle on this answer, but I think both matter. The change and the level both matter. And of course, it depends what kind of business you're dealing with. But I would say from a bigger story, the Bank of Canada is probably just about done, if not done, cutting rates. Remember, they got as high as 5% on their overnight rate. Now we're down to 2.25%.
Right.
That's a pretty dramatic change in about a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And they've all but told us they think they're finished cutting rates. So now that doesn't mean they're going up. I actually still believe if there's going to be any change in rates this coming year, it's more likely to be a small reduction rather than a small increase. But I think the big story is rates are back to quote normal. Mm-hmm. I don't see zero rates as being normal like we had during the pandemic. That's not normal. Something around 2% or a little bit higher is what I consider to be normal for very short-term rates. A bit higher than that for mortgage rates. But, when we look back over the last 25 years, this is about as normal as we've been for interest rates on either side. And I suspect we're going to be around this territory for a while. And that's not a bad world for small businesses to have a bit of certainty on that front and have rates a little bit on the lower side than what we've been used to the last few years.
With the interest rates finally coming down to an quote unquote normal level, do you see real estate maybe making a bit of a comeback this year?
I do in certain parts of the country. And let's face it, there is a really different story when you go to different regions of the country. Like if I travel to Quebec or Alberta and talk about a real estate correction, they don't know what I'm talking about. Those markets have been very solid throughout, as they have been in Atlantic Canada and some of the other prairie provinces. Mm-hmm. The correction is mostly an Ontario and a BC story, especially Ontario. I don't think that correction is necessarily fully run its course in Southern Ontario. The reality is affordability is not back to normal.
Right.
And with interest rates going probably about as low as they've got to go, the only lever to get affordability back to reasonable levels is to see the home values come down a little bit further. I'm not talking about a huge further correction. They've already corrected a lot.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to remain under a little bit of pressure still. And the fact the population growth has slowed so much, that's taken a bit of heat out of real estate as well.
If home values continue to drop, though, do we risk maybe recession, or do you think it'd have to be a pretty big drop for that to happen?
I think it would have to be a much bigger drop than what we've seen. Keep in mind, the national reported home prices have come down by 19% from their peak in 2022, but it's been spread out over almost 4 years. So it's not felt great, but it hasn't felt bad either. In some ways, we've gotten back to a better balanced market in about as healthy a way as we could have possibly done. Mm-hmm. The kind of decline in home prices I see, again, is pretty localized. It's not big enough to really destroy consumer confidence.
Now, as you had warned earlier in the year, unemployment was probably going to go up this year, and it did. It peaked around 7.1% in August and in September before finishing at 6.8%, which is up 0.25% from where we started in January. We mentioned, the Prime Minister's significant investment in his budget to accelerate construction of nation-building projects and all this great stuff. This should be good news for those concerned about unemployment, right, for 2026?
It will help. And frankly, I think one of the pleasant surprises over the past year is that the unemployment rate didn't rise more than it did. Mm-hmm. It's really very little change in the last year. And I think most economists have actually been pleasantly surprised. Now, part of that story is the growth of the population has slowed very dramatically as a direct result of caps on immigration, especially students. So we've actually seen the youth jobless rate come down a bit. I'm not sure we're completely out of the woods. The offset to a lot of the infrastructure spending and the defense spending is we've still got this massive question mark over what happens with trade with the U.S. Right. And I'm still concerned that we're not going to be able to reach a full form deal on USMCA with renewal with the U.S. this year. I would not be shocked if we have to review it again next year.
Sure.
And unfortunately, as long as we have that uncertainty on the trade side, there is the concern that the unemployment rate might drift up a little bit from here in the next 6 months. But I see if we look out into 27, I would see it coming back down by that point.
That's good news. Let's hope that happens. So Let's look at risk and end it on a positive note. We'll start with risk first for 2026. For small businesses, what should owners look out for in 2026?
Well, I hate to bring it up, but really the geopolitical backdrop to me is the thing that keeps, if anything keeps me awake at night, it's that.
Yeah.
It's all the uncertainty we've been dealing with. Look, even in the first 3 weeks of 2026, we've had to deal with all kinds of headline events, especially out of the White House. That's not going to go away, but there's lots of risks, and I would have to circle the USMCA renegotiation or review as being the number one risk from my perspective. Another thing, and I almost shudder to bring this up, we do have a comeback election later this year, and the PQ is leading in the polls, and they have openly said that they would like to hold a referendum if they are reelected. And this is like a trip to the dentist, but it's something that we have to keep on our calendar or radar for 2026. So those are some of the risks I'm looking at.
So let's end it on a positive note. What are you looking forward to for the Canadian economy in 2026?
First of all, I want to say the economy and the markets have managed through a lot of policy uncertainty over the past year. We're going to be dealing with a lot of noise this year as well. Let's try to look through it. I think there are reasons to be optimistic. As I said, interest rates are back down to normal levels. Inflation, well, it's not quite all the way back to normal. It's past those really big increases we saw in the past. And we've had a tremendous performance by the equity market in the last year. Usually that is a good leading indicator for the Canadian economy. It's not that well represented in the Toronto Stock Exchange, but the very strong gains we've had in the last couple of years, to me, that gives me with a bit of sense of optimism that is foreshadowing better times ahead.
The 2025 holiday season kicked off, as it always does, with Black Friday last year. Early numbers showed a relatively flat spend across the country with a few regional variations, but now the full season data is in. So did consumer spending pick up? Did it stay flat? Or did it decline? Well, here to break it all down with us is our Moneris data expert, Sean McCormick. And Sean, I know we're already halfway through January, but I'm going to say it one last time. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Al. I will say it one last time as well, I guess, then, huh?
Did you have a good holiday?
I did. Rested, relaxed, and the temperature has been turned down on everything for about the next week, and then things will ramp back up.
But pick back up, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start with the headline. Overall, how did this year's holiday season compare to previous years?
It was comparable to last year, Al, and by that I mean flat. It was down a little bit less than 1% nationally, talking total spend, which I was talking to one of my economic development contacts out west yesterday, Edmonton Chamber of Commerce actually, and they were surprised that it was flat. And you have to remember, in order to move the needle into that like impressive category of like being +4, +5, +6%, that would be like a booming state of affairs.
Right.
Because you have to consider that inflation is 2%.
Sure.
So if it's flat or down a little bit year over year nationally, like it was this year at -1%, that is Canadians spending 1% less on goods that cost 2% more. So there's actually a 3% delta there.
Right.
So typically what you would like to see, when an economy is in the upswing, consumer spending would be in the upswing as well, typically. What you'd like to see is about a 2% year-over-year growth, which would be aligned with inflation, 2% or maybe even more, like in 3% for consumer spending. So we didn't see that. We saw -1%.
Okay,
It didn't surprise me based on what we've seen nationally for the last 18 to 24 months, and it especially didn't surprise me based on this disappointing year-over-year numbers on Black Friday. Right. Nationally, spend was down like 4%. That's like right. Black Friday over Black Friday. So I wasn't surprised when I saw 1% off for the entire holiday season being November 1st through the end of December.
Now, those Black Friday numbers showed that, but it also showed some variations, regionally across the country. Right. So what does the data show? Like which provinces came out on top this time?
Yeah, nothing really. I wouldn't call it, there were no outliers, outliers being like extremely off the mark based on the national numbers. So, Manitoba led the way in terms of the provinces, up 2%. Right. So that, in line with inflation. So basically the same kind of spending as last year for people in Manitoba. The territories were up 3%. Population is very small up there, though, as well, right? So we would expect more variance, either positive or negative in the territories. In terms of the net losers year over year, Saskatchewan came in at -2%. Ontario was -1%. So Ontario was in line with the national average. Quebec was minus 1%, in line with that national number. So really no outliers. Everything was, if I can sum it up in a very simple, popular term these days, meh.
Right. Well put. So let's talk a little bit maybe about the busiest retail days of the season. When we talked last month, Black Friday is usually on top. Is that the same thing this year?
Yeah. We saw a lot of activity on Black Friday, even though it was down, like I said, a little bit year over year. It was still, as a shopping event goes, it was still up 25% versus the previous Friday on the calendar. Right. So as a shopping event, it still got people out. It just didn't quite get them out as much as it did Black Friday 2024. Right. Similar for the entire, similar to what we saw for the entire holiday shopping season. But it was the busiest shopping day of the year. Number 2 on the list, which was 95% of Black Friday's volumes, was Tuesday, December 23rd. Okay. Christmas fell on Thursday this year, of course. Then number 3 was Monday, December 22nd. What we typically have seen historically, is that the closer Christmas is to the previous weekend. So if Christmas is on a Monday or a Tuesday, a lot of times what we see is that final shopping weekend of the season can have more volume than Black Friday. Right. But because Christmas was later on in the week, the relevance of that last shopping weekend to jam in those last minute purchases was more muted because Christmas was later on in the week. But Black Friday, busiest shopping day. Cyber Monday came in at number 11 of the 61 days. It was 76% of Black Friday volume. And everybody asks about Boxing Day. Boxing Day is, it's kind of just another day. It's a stat holiday is really all it is. It was actually, out of the 61 days, it was number 59. So November 1 to December 31st, it was number 59. Yeah. Again, it's a stat holiday now. Mm-hmm. So people are exhausted from the Christmas rush, the turkey dinners. Hanukkah is right around the same time. People are, now they're just putting their feet up on Boxing Day. Back in the day when Boxing Day was the halcyon days of Boxing Day, is when there was no e-commerce. Right. So that was a call to action to get out and line up the electronics store or the bay or whatever it was. But that call to action is gone because you don't actually have to leave the house to buy anything. Right. Like literally, you don't have to leave the house to buy anything. You can even eat without leaving the house now and get restaurant quality food delivered. Yeah. So, it's a stat holiday now. It's really, it's not a shopping event anymore. And in terms of returns, I mean, retailers have stretched it out to Boxing Week now and stuff. So it's not like you have to do it the day after anymore. You can kind of take your time because, I'm with you. After the holidays, I'm bushed. I'm full of eating too much food. The last thing I want to do is go out to a busy shopping mall or something to do more shopping. And you know what? I would add to that, Al, you're bang on. And I would add another component to that, which is, we're not in heady times right now as consumers in Canada, right? It's cyclical. Like it'll come back. Mm-hmm. We're in a trough right now. Given that, I think that consumers spent all of their money leading up to Christmas, right? Everybody's a bit more stretched than we were last year. You spent all this money, your credit card bill is going to be like about, the envelope might actually explode in your mailbox. Yeah. You just Boxing Day, like the last thing people are thinking about right now is spending more money. Yeah. So they're spending it with their family. They're spending it with their loved ones. They're going tobogganing. They're doing the types of things you would expect to do on Boxing Day that don't involve shopping. Exactly. Now, if folks want to learn more about Moneris Data Services and what you guys do, where can they go? MonerisDataServices.com. Okay. Thank you so much, Sean, for joining me today. And here's to hopefully a full year of amazing data stories to come. Thanks, brother. Same to you. So now we've heard that spending during the 2025 holiday shopping season in Canada was relatively flat, and that AI was one of the top 3 stories of the past year. So what does this mean for small business owners across the country? Joining us to share his perspective is Benjamin Jacob. He's the Senior Vice President of Services at Mastercard Canada. Benjamin, thank you for joining me on Just Good Business today.
Thanks for having me, Al.
So let's just look back quickly at the 2025 holiday season. I just heard from our data expert, Sean McCormick, who said spending was relatively flat across the country. How does that align with what Mastercard has been tracking?
Yeah, 2025 was a year of transition. We saw stabilization in spending patterns as consumers became more intentional about being value conscious. So this flat year-over-year performance reflects a consumer that's carefully orchestrating their budget. While top-line growth is moderated, the underlying story was about a shift in how Canadians are spending their money rather than a lack of demand. Stabilization in 2025 has actually set the stage for what we're calling an adaptive economy.
So we've noticed that the traditional shopping calendar is changing. According to Sean McCormick, a day like Boxing Day, which used to be the biggest shopping day, no longer registers as a top shopping day at all. So based on your findings, how has the holiday shopping timeline evolved?
Yeah, it's a great question. This has really changed. I think maybe it's not as much of a surprise for people, but the shopping season's really elongated. And what this really means is that as savvy consumers are seeking value, they're seeking it earlier, and they're spreading their spend across more strategic timeframes. So this whole notion of a Boxing Day peak has evolved into a multi-week marathon, if you will. And as shoppers become more and more proactive in their deal seeking, this allows them to better manage their household cash flow in a value-conscious environment. So I think what's key here is that merchants should really prepare for a season that starts earlier and requires sustained engagement rather than a single-day surge.
So if the window is stretching to more of like a multi-week marathon, I would think that would be a more advantage for a consumer.
Yeah, for sure. So, the savvy consumer really gets the benefit of time, right? They have the ability to orchestrate their spending to maximize their value without compromising their cash flow. So by spreading their purchases over November and even into October, consumers can really avoid that December crunch, right? So they can manage their holiday budget a little bit better. That elongated season also eliminates that idea of inventory anxiety, right? People are worried they won't get that deal, so they want to try and rush out and get them, right? So people have more time to research, compare prices, and make sure that they're getting the best value for their money. So we're seeing that when consumers aren't rushed by that single day deadline, they make more intentional choices, shifting from this idea of like panic buying to selecting gifts and experiences that really have much more emotional value, right? For the business owner, this really means a more predictable flow of traffic, right? The ability to have a deeper relationship with the customer over several weeks rather than just that frantic few hours that you might get on Boxing Day.
Very good. Now, moving into 2026, how do you think that change in kind of consumer behavior, how will that continue?
I think the reality is that this year's consumer really is savvy. They're looking for lower cost substitutes for everyday goods to protect their budgets and really starting to invest more in meaningful moments and travel is what we're starting to see. They're shifting away from goods that aren't as necessary and looking at things like travel and live events. Large scale events in 2026 are really meaningful opportunities. You look back, I know it was talked about in a previous podcast as well. We saw a significant lift from our data as well with the World Series. 27% growth in restaurants and hotels, 45% growth. And we're seeing, similar impact from things like the Taylor Swift concert that you might remember was in 2024. Based on the Mastercard Economic Institute's 2026 outlook, we expect real services spending to reaccelerate and outperform real goods this year. So it's not about spending less necessary. It's about optimizing the necessary and afford the eventful. Clearly, there's a preference for experiences that offer emotional value and gratifications. This really means that merchants can look at the experience as the new product, right? So even goods-based retailers can wrap their offerings in a service-oriented narrative.
That Blue Jay run was so much fun. And you're right, like it contributed to a lot of spending, and especially in Toronto.
Yeah, it certainly was. We see the positive impact it had on the city. Everybody just had a wonderful vibe going on and just across the whole country as a whole.
Yeah, amazing. Now, were there any other specific pockets of growth or decline that maybe merchants should be aware of going forward?
Yeah, so kind of just in keeping with what I've been talking about, right? Like merchants realize that holiday wallet has been split. Like we're seeing a decline in traditional gift categories like toys, low-end electronics, right? But a massive appetite for tech and for travel. So when you think about that, like growth, we're seeing in experiences like cruises, hotel stays, air travel. We saw that accelerate through summer 2025, and that's going to continue to outperform traditional retail. Hotel spending was strong in 2025 as more Canadians opted for domestic travel to support local economies. So, one thing we're saying is watch for the savvy pivot, because consumers are trading down on physical goods by finding lower cost substitutes, saving their money to spend on live events and meaningful moments.
Let's move on over to AI now. AI was one of Douglas Porter's top 3 stories of 2025. What do you see as a practical role of AI and digital tools for small businesses going forward?
Yeah, there's no doubt that AI is here and it's here to stay, right? It's being leveraged. And we're seeing that as a key growth driver that's allowing small and medium enterprises to really sharpen their edge.
Right.
You can increase productivity and even navigate some of these macro changes more effectively. So the Mastercard Economic Institute report highlights that technological transformation is a key tailwind for the global economy. So when you think about that, like digital tools can help small businesses catch real-time shifts in consumer demand, which is critical in today's rapidly evolving world, especially as they're starting to compete more and more with larger firms. Leveraging this type of technology can really give them a competitive edge.
So if you're a small business owner, what would you advise them to prepare for this change that's coming?
I'd say, one is embrace the technology. It's something that we're all seeing in our day-to-day lives, but it certainly can help them in their own businesses and look at how that can be a force multiplier for them. But the reality is, success in this type of environment requires you to be agile, and you have to pivot your offerings to stay alert and pay attention to the real-time shifts in consumer demand. Merchants need to be ready to swap in or highlight lower cost substitute goods to retain price sensitive customers who are hunting for that value. This year, stay alert to real-time data shifts. It's not an option, but it's necessary really for you to be able to navigate the current market. So better data leads to better decisions. Consumers are becoming more strategic orchestrators of their wallets, and they'll optimize their spending on necessities specifically so they don't have to sacrifice travel and experience budgets.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at small business owners who are in the last year with the trade war and stuff, looking for different supply chain options and opportunities, I feel like AI would be a good tool to help in that case.
Yeah, for sure. Like, the tools can help them optimize their business from both maybe looking at how their consumers are spending, but also on their supply side as well. So small businesses are the most vulnerable to these shifts that we're seeing in the digital world, but they're also the most agile to embrace these digital tools. Right. So they're not going to be as hindered by some of the larger enterprises. And when we think about it, small businesses are really the heart of our economy. So we want to see them leveraging this technology. You often have less margin for error because they're smaller businesses. Right. But if you leverage AI and data-driven insights, you can manage those supply chain disruptions that we got familiar with way back during COVID, and even looking forward as your consumer spending patterns start to change. Right. So in 2026, we advise merchants to capitalize on fiscal tailwinds. Right. So with tax incentives slated to support R&D, 2026 presents a window for strategic investments in equipment and technology before the full impact of trade-driven prices really is felt. Stay alert to the data.
I love that point. Yeah, you're right. Larger businesses would have a harder time to make the changes necessary, whereas a small business, you have the advantage of being agile.
Yeah, and maybe even it's a bit of a plug, but we have specialized tools, right, provided by Mastercard for small businesses. So we have what's called a cyber security assessment tool and a small business navigator, a suite of resources and cost-saving opportunities from our partners like Moneris. Okay, well, that's an amazing segue to my last question, which is, if folks wanted to learn more about what Mastercard is doing to support small businesses, where should they go? Yeah, it's actually really easy. www.mastercard.ca/small business, or check us out on LinkedIn. You can find out a lot of information. We're publishing a lot of relevant data specifically for the Canadian market, not just the global market.
Okay, thank you so much for your time today, Benjamin.
It was a pleasure, Al. Thank you.
And that's our show for this month. Once again, please check the show notes for links to everything we talked about in this episode. If you have any questions about anything business related, you can email us at podcast@moneris.com, and we'll try to answer them in future episodes. Also, you can check out videos to all of our interviews on the Moneris YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe to see them as they're released. On behalf of Douglas, Sean, Benjamin, myself, and the rest of Moneris, it's just good business saying thank you for listening. See you in February.